The Devil's Lantern. In a secluded village nestled in the shadow of the Carpathian Mountains, there existed a legend that no one dared speak of during the light of day. The story of Luminita, the Devil's Lantern, was passed down from one generation to the next, whispered only in the dim corners of taverns and around crackling hearths at night. The villagers had grown up with the tale, but they had long dismissed it as superstition, a myth meant to keep children from straying too far into the woods. But as the seasons turned and the nights grew longer, the story seemed more real, especially when the first mists of autumn rolled in and the cold winds from the mountains swept through the village, bringing with them an eerie silence. It was said that deep within the dark, fog-covered woods beyond the village, a mysterious figure appeared at night. The Luminita was a ghostly woman, condemned to roam the forest for eternity, carrying a lantern that glowed with an otherworldly light. According to the villagers, her lantern lured the curious and the unwary into the woods, drawing them deeper and deeper until they were lost forever. It was not just a trick of the eyes, but a malevolent force. Those who followed her light never returned. The worst part of the legend was the screaming. They said the woman would sometimes cry out, but not in the way one would expect from a living creature. It was the wail of someone in agony, twisted with grief, as if she was pleading for help. And anyone who heard that cry, they claimed, would soon be consumed by it, plunged into despair and driven to chase the light, no matter the cost. Mihai, a strong-willed young man from the village, had always been a skeptic. Raised on tales of mythical creatures and dark legends, he believed these stories were merely the ramblings of old people who had too much wine or too many years behind them. He had lived his entire life without experiencing anything out of the ordinary. But that all changed one late autumn evening. It had been a long day of work for Mihai, who had been chopping wood on the outskirts of the village. The sky darkened quickly, and the chill in the air told him it was time to head home. As he made his way back along the familiar path, he noticed a strange fog beginning to creep along the ground. The trees, which were usually so welcoming, stood like silent sentinels, their branches skeletal against the dark sky. The fog was thick now, pressing in on him from all sides. He quickened his pace, but as he neared the edge of the forest, a faint flicker of light appeared through the mist. It seemed far off at first, too far to make out, but the glow grew brighter as he continued on his path. Probably just a lantern left by someone, Mihai muttered to himself. But something about the light made his skin crawl. It was a strange, unnatural glow, neither warm nor inviting. It flickered like a candle in the wind, moving just slightly as though beckoning him. The forest around him was quiet, almost too quiet. No wind rustled the leaves, no animals called from the trees. The silence seemed suffocating, oppressive. Despite the warning bells ringing in his mind, Mihai found himself drawn to the light. It seemed to pull at him, like an invisible thread guiding him deeper into the woods. With each step, the light grew stronger, and Mihai's heartbeat quickened. The further he walked, the thicker the fog became, and the more the trees seemed to close in on him. The path he had been following was now gone, swallowed by the mist. Still, the lantern light flickered ahead of him, just within reach. "Who's there?" he called out, but his voice was swallowed by the thick air. There was no reply, only the soft, rhythmic glow of the lantern. Suddenly, the sound of a soft cry reached his ears, just a faint whimper at first, then growing into a desperate wail. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard before. It was a voice, but it was distorted, agonized, the voice of someone lost, begging for help. Mihai froze. This wasn't right. The wailing seemed to carry on the wind, wrapping itself around his thoughts, pulling him further into the forest. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just an animal in distress. But the cry continued, unbearable in its desperation, and he found himself moving once again toward the light. Then he saw her. At first, the figure appeared to be a woman standing in the mist, holding a lantern that seemed to glow brighter with each step he took. She was draped in tattered clothing, her long dark hair hanging in wild strands around her face. Her eyes were hollow, staring into the distance, as though she could see something beyond the mortal realm. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and her lips twisted in an eternal scream. The woman lifted the lantern high, and Mihai felt an icy chill seep into his bones. His heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to turn back, but his legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. Come, the woman whispered, her voice soft, like a breeze through the trees. Come closer. The wail grew louder, and Mihai felt his mind clouding. His body moved of its own accord, stepping closer to the glowing light. The woman's form flickered like a flame, wavering in the dense fog. Every step toward her felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, but he couldn't stop himself. The lantern beckoned him, a pull too strong to resist. Do not follow her, a voice shouted from somewhere in the distance. Mihai stopped, suddenly snapping out of the trance. He turned around, heart racing, only to see an old man standing at the edge of the mist. The man's face was etched with fear and regret, his eyes wild. The Luminita, the man gasped. You must leave. She will take your soul. You'll never see daylight again. But Mihai didn't hear the man's words. The lantern had moved again, drawing him closer. The banshee's cry filled his ears, a sound of endless sorrow and pain. He had to follow. Please, the old man pleaded, stepping forward. The lantern is a curse. If you follow it, you will never return. The light is the devil's, and it will consume you. Mihai's breath quickened as the woman beckoned again. The fog seemed to thicken, closing in around him. His legs moved forward on their own, each step bringing him closer to the woman with the lantern. And just as he was within arm's reach, he heard it. The wail of the woman's voice, shrill and full of unbearable grief, and then the final, devastating words, "Join me, forever." With one last step, Mihai reached out to grasp the lantern, but the ground beneath him suddenly gave way. The world around him spun as he tumbled into the darkness. The last thing he saw was the woman's face, twisted in eternal sorrow, as the lantern flickered out. The villagers never found Mihai, but the old man who had tried to warn him would never forget the desperate scream that echoed through the trees that night. The cry of the lost souls led by the devil's lantern, forever cursed to walk the fog-filled woods, just waiting for the next curious soul to wander too far.